Earlier this year, I had a conversation with Kevin Williams about organizing. Kevin is one of my mentors and has at least 40 years experience. He's trained hundreds of leaders and organizers through the Western Organizational Resource Council's Principles of Community Organizing. Kevin has been the staff director of the Western Colorado Alliance, as well as working for work. He lives in Montrose, Colorado, and he's currently the chair of WCA's board and also sits on the board of his local Rural Electric Association, Delta Montrose Rural Electric. In the early 2000s, Kevin, Pat Sweeney, another mentor of mine, and probably other work staff redesigned and updated the POCO training. One of the tools they created was Work's 10 Principles of Organizing. I will link to a copy of these principles in the video description. It's these principles that form the basis for this conversation. However, to begin, Kevin talked about how to use principles, as well as the difference between principles and standards. I think this conversation is a very good exploration of the basic ideas around organizing and should be useful to organizers and community people trying to figure out how to impact elected leaders who seem to ignore the wishes of local people. This is a longer video, and I hope those of you who need this information find it useful.
I think if you look at these, I think principles are very different from standards. And if you look at these principles, I believe that, so Herb White, who was one of Pat Sweeney's mentors, Herb and Jessica, his saying was how these principles are applied depends on the place and the music, which is a funny way of saying, how these are applied varies depending on the issue, the people involved, the culture, whether you're people of color or indigenous or white. I firmly believe whether you're third generation family farmers or indigenous people or people of color, that these principles can and should be applied, but how they're applied depends on the situation and the culture. So principles are broad. Standards is a different thing. And, there's a lot of talk about standards right now. And, I think it's a mistake for us. I think if you're a community organizer, there's certain standards that you should try to uphold. But again, that's way different than principles that apply to organizing. And I think we get in trouble if we approach like our indigenous groups and say, it's got to be this way, X, Y, Z. And if you don't do it this way, then, you can't live up to our new strategic plan. That's the wrong way to approach it. So anyway, those are some general thoughts about it.
So let's maybe, if you could give me, like you said, standards are different, but what's a standard?
A standard for organizers that I've always believed in is that we work with people, not for people, and that's quite a bit different. And that our job is to build the agency of people and their ability to speak and act for themselves. And every time we get up as a paid staff person and do that for them, we're taking away an opportunity from somebody. That's a standard.
So in general, standards are, like axioms.
Yeah, and I view standards more within the context of what is an organizer's job. I view these principles as broad, overarching principles that apply to how do you organize people.
The first one is we work to affirm people's abilities, develop their own talents, and speak and act for themselves.
I've spent my whole career doing this, but I guess one more recent one that I was very proud of is during the pandemic here in Montrose County, we worked on childcare because childcare is a crisis across the country, and it's worse now than it even was then. And we built a team that included parents with kids, teachers, and childcare providers. It was very diverse. I know for a fact that we had a couple people on our team that, if I talked to them about who they voted for president, I'm sure they voted for Trump, but it didn't matter. Common threats create common ground. And we presented to the city and the county over Zoom because it was during the pandemic, so we couldn't meet face to face. And we had teachers, childcare providers, and parents share their stories with the city council and the county commission. And then our request was fund a countywide childcare assessment. And we got the city and the county to both commit money to that. But we centered the lived experience and stories of people. It wasn't me standing up there talking about childcare, you know, a 70-year-old guy with a 40-year-old daughter. That wouldn't have made much sense.
Why do you think that's so much more effective than the scenario you described at the end of having, you know, some spokesperson with limited connection to the problem be the person talking?
Well, one, if we don't provide a way for more people to exercise their own agency in public life, then our democracy is doomed. It's already doomed, or it's halfway doomed. And you know, I don't want to smash advocacy. I'm not like out and out opposed to staff speaking in some, like at the legislature. You know, sometimes things happen so quickly, right, that it's hard to round up a person. Like yesterday, Tyler McDermott called me and said, "Will you testify tomorrow on a data center bill?" And, you know, I've had so much going on that I just couldn't commit to do it. And I'm guessing Tyler is probably going to do it as our staff person, but I'm okay with that. So this gets back to principles, Frank, right? They're not like ironclad. If you break this, we're going to throw you in jail and throw the key away. You know, sometimes you got to be flexible and adaptable.
So the next one is we promote a bottom-up philosophy and process.
I mean, I've been involved in, you know, lots of organizing work over the years where we got a group of people together. And two things happen. Sometimes an issue is presented to us. And I know you've had this experience, right? It just crops up. People are up in arms. Oh my God, you know, they want to build a toxic waste facility, or they want to build a 5,000 head, 10,000 head, you know, mega dairy farm in our, you know, a mile from town. And then, you know, we work with people. But again, when we work with people, we go out, we talk to them, we build relationships. You know, you don't just show up at the county commissioner meeting and start testifying. You get families and farmers and people in town that are going to be impacted by it. And the other way it often happens with issues is we may not have a hot button issue like that, but we get a group of people together and, you know, we do a little bit of research. We talk to public officials. We figure out what's going on in the community. And then together in a bottom-up process, we decide what it is we're going to work on. You know, I think one thing I truly believe as an organizer is that it's important to see not only what's happening in a community, but what could be happening in a community. Because sometimes there's an underlying issue that hasn't surfaced that could be a really good one.
We develop public relationships by meeting the people with one-on-one and face-to-face.
Again, these are so interrelated, right? But to me, as democracy, small d democracy is encapsulated in this principle. It means the people have the power, right? The people have the agency, the ability to speak and act for themselves, to decide what we work on.
This one, I just want one thing that this speaks to me about, and maybe you can talk a little bit about this, is that the concept of organizing isn't complicated, but the work is hard. And I think we often try and, you know, short circuit the last part of this principle, which is meeting with people one-to-one and face-to-face.
I think you're right. To quote John Smiley, it's not rocket surgery. You know, it's not hard. But the work is very hard. You know, we haven't put enough emphasis on getting out and doing one-on-ones and building those public relationships.
We foster democratic values.
To me, democracy means people have agency. They're willing to speak and act for themselves, and that's what we're all about as community organizers and community organizations. I mean, the barriers to doing that are immense, as you know. I mean, the economy, people struggling to make ends meet. If you're parents with kids, you can't afford childcare. Time, the culture that denigrates or discriminates against people of color or indigenous. I mean, there's just so many barriers which makes organizing really hard. Popular education, boy, we need to do more of it. You remember, you've been around almost as long as I have, but I think we did a whole series around captive supply. We did a whole series around corporate power. Way back in the day, we did a whole thing around who owns the West. You may remember that. Boy, that's probably just as relevant today as ever.
So I think it's worth on this one though, like how is popular education different than what people might traditionally think of as education?
It's thoughtful, it's structured, it's based on data, it's based on facts. I mean, it's probably more important today than ever, given how much misinformation and disinformation we have, and the fact that our president spews lies out of his mouth every day that aren't based in reality. But it's also tied to specific issues or campaigns, right? It's not just general education, which there's nothing wrong with, but it's tied to specific issues and campaigns and moving our policy agenda forward.
I think that's a key part, is that it's everyone's understanding that it's education with a purpose to achieve something that we've agreed on.
Well, and the axiom that really applies here is that we don't organize people to educate them, we educate them to organize them. So the education is tied to a specific purpose and an issue, a campaign, right?
We build and exercise power.
Well, it comes back to, and it's a concept that people don't think about, many people are uncomfortable with, which is why we constantly talk about it in our network and our groups. But it boils, I hate to oversimplify it, but it basically comes down to there's two forms of power, money and people. And, we're up against a lot of money, organized money, mega corporations, government agencies. The power that we have is people power, right? It's people willing to speak up, act for themselves. And the definition of power is the ability to act, right, and influence policies, programs, our cultural value, whatever, that's power. And we need to build and exercise it.
We value action over rhetoric.
This is also one, the older I get, the less patient I am with things. It's like, can we stop studying this and just decide something we can do, and let's just go do it, and then let's evaluate it. Maybe we screw up big time, or maybe we actually have do something really successful, whatever. We're going to make mistakes, but let's go do something. And then, there's a middle ground here. You just want to throw yourself out, without some thought and discussion with the grassroots, because we're grassroots, right? And we want input. I go back. I'm sure you heard this story from me when I was the executive director of the Alliance. I was working with our clean air committee because we had the Louisiana Pacific Wafer Board plant. And, and we decided to walk out of an Air Quality Control Commission meeting. And we did. And one of our members, Marv Ballantyne, I think you met Marv, composed a song to the death of clean air in the valley. And he got up and started strumming his banjo, and we all got up, like 75 of us, and walked out of the room. There were 200 LP employees there swearing at us, spitting at us, and we just walked out of the room. And I almost lost my job over that because the president of the board wasn't looped in on the action and showed up and, and was appalled. Anyway, that's just a story, but...
Those stories are important because I think that that is right. And I think one of the things you kind of said in passing was so important to this one is that you do something, then you evaluate how it worked. And if it worked, you do it again. And if it didn't work, you think of something else to do. Or if you've done something the same way for years, forever, and you do it again and it doesn't work, then you need to actually take a step back and say, why didn't it work this time? What's changed? What's the different, So the idea of having the simple concept in my mind is that you do something over just talk about it. Although you, of
Right.
course, we talk about it because that, everyone. But the point is, the talk is to get to doing something. But
And
then,
we're probably we probably talk about things a lot. Probably too much, Frank, right?
I think we talk about things a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also a saying in organizing, every action has a reaction, right? But if you don't take the action, you're never going to get a reaction.
Yep.
I mean, look at the farm crisis when we had crosses on the lawn of the state capitol of 300 family farms that had lost their farms. Some of them had committed suicide. I thought that was a very effective action.
Where did we do that? Was that in Montana?
That was in Montana and Helena.
We pursue a variety of strategies. And then let's do the two together. So we pursue a variety of strategies and we're multi-issue.
Both of these principles are hard to put into practice sometimes. I think when we say we're multi-issue, I think maybe some of our organizers or leaders think like right out of the box, we need to be working on three different things. And that's not the intent of this. In fact, I've been to so many local groups over the years that I would argue that, like when we're forming a new affiliate and they decide we're going to create three committees and work on three different issues, I think that's a big mistake. We don't even have a track record. We haven't accomplished anything. We haven't taken any action. And we're going to like spread ourselves too thin. So, but it does mean that we're trying to create, permanent institutions in our communities and states that are around for the long haul, and that over a period of years and decades that we're going to be working on a variety of different issues. And here at the Western Car Alliance, we've made a fairly big transformation. We focused a lot on environmental and public lands issues in our early years, and now we're really all about social and economic justice, and specifically affordable housing, public transportation, childcare. And, we made that shift because we're multi-issue. If you look at our mission and vision, it's broad enough to encompass any or all of those issues, right? As opposed to like the National Rifle Association that's focused on one issue, or Physicians for Social Responsibility, or I mean, pick your other group. I mean, the strategy one is one that I found hard, challenging people, and I've written nuts and bolts things about this, but strategy is a major commitment of your resources. It's a decision to say, we're going to go down this, but we're going to run a ballot measure. We're going to run a bill at the state legislature. We're going to file a lawsuit. We're going to, try to do a good neighbor agreement with the Stillwater Mining Company. Those are all strategies, right? Tactics are all the little things that fall under that, the actions and activities that we take, the letters to the editor, the meeting with the CEO, meeting with the CEO, on down the line, writing a fact sheet, blah, blah, blah. I think it's important that we consider a broad range of strategies when we're working on issues, whatever those issues may be.
Last one, we strive to reach out and be inclusive.
Absolutely, we need to reach out. If we're doing our job as organizers, again, how these principles are applied depends on the place and the music. So if we're working in a county where there's a reservation, or a significant number of farm workers that are Latino or Asian, or if we're not making a genuine effort to reach out to those folks, and again, some of it depends on the issue, right? So, but then we're not doing our job. I mean, we should be striving, when we organize around issues, that we should be doing all we can to be inclusive and represent the people that live in that community, that county, or whatever. Now, again, really hard.